The idea that during the Second World War, soldiers of the Red Army were so ill-equipped that they sometimes had to share one rifle between two is, in reality, a Hollywood myth. There were almost always enough rifles to go around, though some were a bit old. But this wasn't true for every fighting nation. Some units were so ill-equipped that men raided museums for functioning rifles, while others had no guns at all. In this video, we count down the 5 worst equipped units of the Second World War. You've probably all heard the phrase history is written by the victors, but as recent times have shown, it's also written by those who create the news. In the unprecedented times we're living in, it's easier than ever to get caught up in tribal echo chambers and lose the perspective of the other side. I mean, just think about it. You and your neighbor might be seeing a completely different world based on the information that you read. Thankfully, Ground News is attempting to solve this issue. Ground News is a first of its kind website and app that allows you to compare how any news story is being covered across the political spectrum. It's a tool with easy to use features to help you be more confident you're getting the full picture. One of these tools is the bias distribution chart that shows which outlets are reporting the story and where they stand on the political spectrum. One of my favorite features is the blind spot feed, where you can see stories underreported by either side of the political spectrum, essentially giving you a behind the scenes peek at how the media really reshapes history. To escape the endless partisan media cycle, use ground.news/thefront to check it out, or click the link in the description below to download the app. Be sure to sign up today to get 75% off your subscription as part of Black Friday. First up is the Inner Mongolian Army, a Japanese allied Chinese and Mongol force that fought in northern China. In the 1930s, when the Japanese were making military incursions into China, large parts of the country weren't under direct government control. Warlords dominated peripheral regions and fielded armies to reinforce their territorial claims. One of these peripheries was Inner Mongolia, a region lying south of Mongolia proper and just outside the influence of the Soviet Union. For the Japanese, it was there for the taking. After defeating their armies in battle, the Imperial Japanese Army incorporated enemy soldiers into their ranks as auxiliary troops. Han Chinese bandits were thrown in with Mongol tribesmen and conscripted village irregulars. The conquered groups spoke different languages, had different customs, and refused to take orders from each other. Discipline was a major issue, as was supply. Only half of the men carried rifles, while the rest made do with bows, pikes, and swords. The majority of their equipment was looted, so finding the correct ammunition was exceptionally difficult. Despite this abysmal situation, the Japanese frequently ordered the Inner Mongolian Army to attack the nationalist Chinese. Of all its incompetent groups, the Mongols distinguished themselves as the most courageous, but also the least disciplined. They would willingly charge enemy machine guns on horseback, but would just as readily go on a looting spree across the countryside. The Inner Mongolian Army never got its supply situation sorted out, and when the Red Army came in 1945, the soldiers that hadn't already switched sides were annihilated. Arms shortages weren't solely an issue in the Asia-Pacific theater. They were just as prevalent in Europe. Nowhere was this more true than Britain, and for its most poorly armed unit, the Home Guard. After the British Expeditionary Force's miraculous escape from Dunkirk in 1940, the entire British Army was critically short of weapons. Rightfully, they got first dibs on new weapons, but this meant England's auxiliary force, the Home Guard, didn't really get anything. This was a problem, as the Home Guard were intended to act as a second line of defense in case of invasion. Winston Churchill planned to raise a force of 500,000 men over several months to serve in the Home Guard. Initially called Local Defense Volunteers, these men had previously been deemed unfit to serve, mostly because they were too old. The public was behind the idea, and within a week of the call for volunteers, 250,000 men had enlisted. Within 2 months, 1.5 million had joined. This placed a massive burden on supply, and before long, people were asked to donate their hunting weapons and antique rifles to arm Home Guard units. Functioning Great War era weapons were also taken from museums and put back into the hands of veterans of Flanders and the Somme. By late 1940, 739,000 of 1.682 million volunteers remained unarmed. Churchill declared, "Every man must have a weapon of some sort, be it only a mace or a pike." But when units began receiving their pikes, there was an uproar. Parliament doubled down, with the Under-Secretary for War, Lord Croft, stating the pike was a most effective and silent weapon. The public also lamented the Home Guard situation. Noel Coward, a contemporary singer, composed a song about the atrocious supply situation. It was called "Could You Please Oblige Us with a Bren Gun?" The Home Guard remained critically undersupplied until its disbandment in late 1945. Luckily, they never had to do any real fighting. The Brits weren't the only power rearming old veterans with even older rifles. The Germans were at it too, and the supply situation for their Folkstorm was just as dire. Set up on the personal request of Adolf Hitler in 1944, the Folkstorm was a national militia comprising of men aged 16 to 60. Its ceremonial chief, Josef Goebbels, intended the force to raise morale across the Reich and effectively block the advancing Allies. In reality, mass conscription of boys and old men lowered morale, with the Great War veterans sardonically commenting, "Wir alten Affen sind des Führers neue Waffen." Another common joke was that the Folkstorm were only valuable because its members have silver in their hair, gold in their mouths, and lead in their bones. All available weapons were handed out to Folkstorm units, meaning there was zero standardization. A lucky Folkstormer might get a stamped sheet metal MP3008 and an extra magazine, while an unlucky one might get a single-shot Panzerfaust or a single grenade. Fighters often had to familiarize themselves with their weapons while in combat. Against professional soldiers, they had no chance. Outside Berlin, many Folkstorm units saw continued fighting as pointless and surrendered to the Western Allies. None wanted to be taken prisoner by the Soviets. While the Polish Home Army was technically an underground resistance, not a third-rate military force, it certainly deserves a mention here. The Home Army was formed from the remnants of the Polish Army after the joint German and Soviet invasion. Over time, civilians joined and were trained in clandestine warfare by special officers. At its peak in 1944, the Home Army had between 200,000 and 600,000 members. Due to a lack of weapons, only small numbers of Home Army personnel could fight conventionally, a problem they tried hard to fix. Secret workshops designed and manufactured Błyskawica, a Polish submachine gun, as well as copies of British Sten guns, flamethrowers, pistols, anti-tank mines, and grenades. By the time of their most famous operation, the Warsaw Uprising, only 1/6 of the Home Army soldiers were armed. But this didn't stop them from inflicting surprisingly high casualties on the occupying Germans. On August 1st, Home Army operatives across Poland rose up against the Germans as part of the nationwide Operation Tempest. Emerging from the sewers all over the city, armband-toting members of the Home Army liberated virtually all of central Warsaw from the Axis. The Poles planned to take over key parts of the city, then hold out for the Soviets, who were just a few kilometers away, to rescue them. But Stalin refused to help. He saw the Home Army as a threat to Soviet-aligned Poland. Astonishingly, Warsaw remained partly under the control of the Home Army for 63 days until the Germans forced them back underground. But the Axis had numbers and weapons on their side. A Wehrmacht report sent after the uprising stated, "The resistance fought to the very last bullet." Thus far, each of these undersupplied units have actually been armed with firearms, and sometimes fairly good ones. Not so for this last unit, which was by far the most poorly armed fighting force of the Second World War, Imperial Japan's Volunteer Fighting Corps. By April 1945, Japan's army and navy were fighting last-ditch battles and sending out suicide missions in an attempt to force the Allies into accepting surrender terms. Strapped for resources and with most of the working-age men in the military, Japan had a very tough time keeping its regular forces supplied. So when the government decided to raise a civilian militia to fight in the home islands, there were no weapons available. Government officials conscripted all men aged between 15 and 60, all women aged between 17 and 40 to fight in district volunteer fighting corps units. 28 million were eligible, but only 2 million had been volunteered before the war ended. On paper, they were armed with an assortment of rifles and pistols, but in reality, they had to make do with whatever they could find. High school girls were given bits of wood, and old men were issued bamboo poles with knives tied to one end. If the Allies invaded, the so-called volunteers had one job: suicidal charge. Japanese government planners knew the volunteer fighting corps would be totally ineffective as soldiers, but that wasn't the point. They wanted to force the Allies to kill so many civilians that they would tire of the bloodshed, accept conditional surrender, and let Japan's top war criminals off the hook. The plan even had a name: the glorious death of 100 million. Those were 5 of the most poorly armed units active during the Second World War. But what do you think? Do you think the British Home Guard could have stopped a German invasion? How do you think those Great War veterans felt when they were given back their old rifles and ordered to fight for Germany again? Why do you think Stalin left the Polish Home Army to its fate? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.